slabs, crackers, and terrifying flush trim bits. This is a good one. I'm Colton, and this is Bearded Moose Woodworking. Now, I know what you're thinking. A slab bench for $500 does not make any sense. There's no way I'm making any money on that. And you'd be totally right. I'm not. Part of a business association in the area, and they reached out to me as they wanted to give a bench to one of the members who's been part of the community here for years and years. And so really loved the idea of doing a slab bench. So I told the business association members that if they paid for the material costs, I'd do the work for free, and was able to get my hands on this nice white oak slab for about $400. And I've got about $100 in other material. Some of that I had laying around the shop from some leftovers, and got to turn it into a pretty sweet park bench in the end. Now, I'll be honest, if I was building this for a client, it would be a much more expensive project than $500. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you would charge for something like this. So leave a comment down below. If you were to build a project like this, what would you charge for a client? Now, I'm a big fan of slabs. I really do love them. Having the CNC to flatten them makes it really easy, but the cleanup process is not always the easiest. So it's super dusty. Luckily, it was a nice day. I was able to open the door, put it right outside. Definitely wear a mask when you're doing this. You do not want to be breathing this in. I just use an angle grinder. Makes pretty quick work of it. I'm really only worried about cleaning it up and trying to get off that last little bit of bark. Now, this is a slab project, and with slabs, you're always going to have epoxy. But you don't, not this project. I'm not a huge fan of epoxy, and for this, it's going to be an outdoor park bench. I just didn't feel like epoxy was going to be a good choice. So for this, I'm just trying to clean it up, get rid of some of the excess wood grain in there, and make it look a little bit cleaner. Now, you'll see a lot of Laguna products in my shop. I love them. I've worked with them in the past. This 20-inch wide planer is one of my favorites. Having this capacity is amazing. It's come in handy multiple times. And one of the other tools that I've added to the shop recently from Laguna is that CNC you saw at the beginning. And with that, one of the things I really want to get after more is designing and using templates. So for this park bench, it was really an opportunity to flex that muscle and get some practice. So I've got the templates roughed out on these boards. I'm just going to go through and get them fairly close. These boards were too wide for the joiner, so I'm going to get them down to a width where I can run them through the joiner and then run them through the planer and get them closer to those lines before I do any template routing. Now, you might be wondering, these are pretty thick boards. Am I going to plane these down a bunch? Am I resawing them? No, I'm actually going to leave them pretty thick. You know, the whole idea with the slab bench is it's a nice, big, solid piece of furniture. Well, if you're wondering how I'm going to template route something this thick, you should definitely stick around because that's pretty exciting. It's not too often you get to see somebody template route something that's 2 inches thick. Now, I'm just trying to get some flat faces. I want to make sure that I can run these through the planer and I get all my pieces the exact same thickness, because obviously as I do the glue up with templated pieces, I don't want things that are multiple different sizes. So going back to the bandsaw here, making sure I'm getting close to that line so that I can put my template pieces on and do the routing. So I'm getting close to being done with prepping these blanks, and at this point we are going to head over to get them template routed. All right, I've got my pieces pretty well ready to go. I've got some templates that I'm actually going to use to route to the joinery. Typical flush trim bit is not going to really work in this situation, so you can do a few different ways. You could use like a templating bit like this,
route it along the template, try to get a little bit closer. That's gonna get you pretty close. They sell bigger ones of these. They also sell bigger of these, but thankfully I have a shaper in my shop, and because of that, I have this lovely little thing. And as you can see, this is going to be able to eat this whole thickness up. So this thing is amazing, also somewhat terrifying. Definitely use some push blocks, make sure you're doing starters, make sure you're feeding the right way. But this is what I'm gonna use for this. If you're using a thinner one, definitely recommend getting yourself a good spiral.
So Tools today sent this shaper cutter out to me. It's a cutter from Amana, and it really is fantastic. It went through this white oak like butter, and it makes me want to do more template projects, because why wouldn't you want to just play with that? Although I will be honest, the intrusive thoughts get to you a little bit with this, but I mean, why wouldn't it? That thing is crazy. So one of the big things with designing this was making sure I could do the assembly process on these sides easily. And so that basically meant just making sure I had enough of a flat edge to reference off. And so I'm just doing some layout, marking for some joinery, and yeah, I'm using the domino. Of course, I have one in the shop. It's fantastic. I'm gonna use it. Now, you could do dowels with this joint. Don't do biscuits. I do recommend you have something to strengthen this joint, because you're doing end grain to edge grain, and you want to make sure that this is nice and sturdy. So for me, the dowels were fantastic. I'm actually doing a dry fit here and gonna clamp this together. I'm gonna flip it over to mark out for dominoes on the other side, because these pieces are so thick and I want to make sure I have plenty of strength. Now, the glue up for this is not the easiest thing in the world, because obviously with these routed templates, you are going to have some curvature to it. But these F-style clamps from Bessie work pretty well. They have enough of a face area to kind of hold everything together. And the glue ups on this went pretty well. I'll be honest, it's always nerve wracking. I'm using epoxy on this, one, because it's an outdoor piece of furniture, but also just to give me more time to make sure I have everything glued up nice and tight. Now, of course, after getting that all glued up, you're gonna want to make sure that it's all cleaned up. So what I did is I built those oversized templates to start, and so this final template is actually a little bit smaller, so I'm now just going to go around with the full assembly and make sure I'm routing directly to that template. This was actually a little bit more comfortable to do because I can keep my hands a little bit further away from that absolute tank of a cutter. Now, I'm far from a professional at this. I am not the best woodworker in the world. But one thing I have learned over the years of doing this is your layout really is the most important thing. So here I'm doing all the layout for the back and the seat, and that's what that slab's going to be. But I've got some support pieces to go across to allow the slab to sit on that. Now, you'll see here I am using the domino again in a vertical plunge. This is not the easiest thing to do. You want to be very slow and steady with it, but using that board as a reference face definitely helps you out. It definitely makes it much easier. Now, if you've made it this far in the project, I really would appreciate if you give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. I've got more fun projects coming up, some tool videos as well, and always appreciate the support. Now, one thing that I don't like using in my furniture typically is any fasteners besides standard wood joints, with the exception being some tabletop fasteners to make things easy. But with this project, I've got a lot going on. It's an outdoor project. It's going to have some slabs for pieces of it. And so even though I've got a lot of dominoes on this, I am going to be adding screws to hold everything together and also to act as a clamp. So even though I'm adding screws, I want to make sure they look nice. So right here, I'm just going to plunge some holes for the screws to go through, and then I'm going to come back later and I'm actually going to plug these. I'll flush trim the plugs and sand everything up nice and smooth. And so I'm just going through here and doing a quick dry fit. There's no glue up on this yet, but I want to make sure I have everything aligned, because the last thing you want to do is try to put everything together with glue or epoxy and nothing lines up.
All right, so this is in kind of an interesting position, but what I'm doing here is it's fairly easy to set the gap for the front to make it all even. I'm using the back as a register against my stretchers. I've got an inch space here, do it on top and bottom. This would be very difficult to do actually sitting in position, and obviously there's not really a great way to tip this down in any other orientation. So what I've done is, like I said earlier, I want to match this top edge with the top of this side here. I've got that in position. I've actually got 2 screws in here to keep that in position right now. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin this like so. I'm going to take my rule here. I'm going to get that distance there locked up, and then I'm actually going to jump up and set this against the stretcher that equal distance. That will give it, get me square, and then I can put some screws there so I know where my hole orientation is. And then I'm actually going to get this thing put down on the ground with everything on.
So I did a lot of dry fitting and pre-drilling and everything on this. I don't show going back and adding the plugs to this bench. I didn't think it was really valuable to show that. Go drill some holes with a plug cutter and put it all together. But I did think it was important that I showed you me sitting on this and eating some crackers, because why wouldn't I want to show that off? And with this being a park bench, you're gonna have your arms on the armrest there and stuff like that. Had to go through and clean up those edges, get a nice little round over on them, get them all sanded up. And I'm a huge fan of white oak, and for an application like this where it's going to be outside, I think it's definitely one of the better choices. So after I get everything cleaned up here, I'm actually going to do the final assembly, and with that I am going to be doing epoxy again, and I'm using those screws to help kind of pull everything together. Glue up went well, end product went well, and honestly, as I'm kind of wrapping up this project, I think the most important thing is, 1, I think it's great to do things for your community, and 2, I'm very, very happy that that shaper cutter did not decide to take my fingers off. Ended the project with all 10, and that's a big win considering. All right, so now that we're at the end of this project, like I said, go shoot me a comment about how much you would charge a client for this, and let me know if you would incorporate a slab into a piece of furniture that's not a table. Thanks for following along, guys. I hope to see you on the next project.